Welcome, everybody, to session 39 of Classic Metal Class. We're going to have a little bit of show and tell this time. Scott is going to give us some demos about tone and how to get the sound that is there in classic doom metal. And we're going to talk a lot about doom metal this time. We've devoted a few earlier sessions to what you could call genre development. And this one's going to be a little bit different. Like we looked at speed metal and how it transitioned into thrash, but aside from a few precursors early on in the 70s, that's mostly 80s stuff, right? And so this time we're going to be focusing on a important genre that's there arguably from the very beginning of heavy metal and continues on strong in the present day. And like a lot of the genres that we see, it's recognized retrospectively. So it gets a name as such in, let's say, the mid 80s is when it starts to get identified as such, but it's there and it's going strong. And it's almost like there's a flavor that nobody knew what to call for a while. And then, in our present, there's lots and lots and lots of doom bands who are, placing themselves within something like a tradition. And we could call it a subsection of heavy metal from 1970 onward. And then it develops all these subgenres, as, so many of the genres do. And I saw something really interesting that maybe we'll start with talking about. So there's an anachronistic distinction that you see people making in the forums about doom metal, where some people want to say there's a difference between doom metal and heavy metal. And I think what that's reflecting is identifying heavy metal with what we would nowadays call traditional heavy metal, and sort of retrospectively looking into that backwards. And I saw one person actually saying, well, some Black Sabbath songs are heavy metal and other Black Sabbath songs are doom metal. And I would have no problem with that at all if they were saying that heavy metal is the overarching genre and then doom metal, some Sabbath songs are also doom metal, actually a lot of them, as it turns out. But they were actually trying to say, no, there's Sabbath that's heavy metal and then there's Sabbath that's doom metal. And I thought, well, that's an interesting thing to say. And I think it's interesting because it's wrong, but wrong in an interesting way. How would somebody come to that conclusion, so that, certainly there's some songs by Black Sabbath, changes that are not doom metal, arguably not even heavy metal. But what do you think about that, Scott? Do you think there's any legs to this like distinction, or is it just, listen, doom metal is a kind of what we called heavy metal back then?
Yeah, I agree with the doom metal being under the umbrella of heavy metal. It's a kind of heavy metal.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it sounds kind of redundant, doom heavy metal. It was doom metal.
I guess if you're in the present day and you think of heavy metal as a subgenre of a larger thing called metal, and what you mean by heavy metal is, I don't know, Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and what we nowadays call traditional heavy metal. I guess that could make sense, but to read it backwards into Black Sabbath just seems really strange. It's not that you can't do it, right? Somebody did do it, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense from that vantage point.
Arguably heavy metal came out of this, Sabbath was a big, Tony Iommi with the riffs and everything, really inspired that kind of playing and that kind of framework for tunes. Black Sabbath's one of those bands that you could play the guitar parts and people know what it is, rather than
good point.
Rather be a series of chords going. It's I don't know how many people play music, but when you're younger, when I was younger, I had my friends that were drummers used to sit down all excited. Hey, guess what tune this is? Tink, tink, tack, tink, tink, tack, you know, and there's, you know, they just learned a new beat or something. And how am I supposed to know what that is unless it's some very signature?
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of the same in, you know, you could play a riff, like if you play Whole Lot of Love by Led Zeppelin, you know what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of the riffs are really slow and doom like, you know, in Sabbath. So I mean, I guess I'd be comfortable calling them either, but it's certainly doom metal is a little more specific to some of their stuff.
Yeah. So another thing that came up in looking at, well, how do people classify this? You know, doom metal gets placed under the rubric of extreme metal as being one of the big four types of it, along with death metal, black metal, and thrash metal. And you know, obviously, there's a lot of overlap between the three of those at times. And I think it's almost like that Sesame Street skit that we used to see as kids, where there was a little song that went, "One of these things is not like the other. Which one is it? Do you know?" And then there'd be like a square, and I don't know, it'd be like three kinds of fruit, and then Grover, you know. So you didn't have to be too smart to figure out what the difference was. But you know, they're all types of metal. But it seems like the other big extreme metal genres, they are different in that they're about like speeding things up and making things harsher and more metallic. And, you know, sometimes different lyrical styles that you're not going to see in doom metal, like the growling or screaming. And I would even say maybe getting away from the blues influence that's in the background. I think that's usually still there in a lot of doom, whereas doom is slower. It's kind of plodding or ponderous. There's even the subgenre that like super slows it down. And I did see some people saying, well, here's another way to think of extreme metal. It's transgressive. It's you know, breaking rules. It's doing something that people aren't doing. But then, I mean, you could say that about pretty much all of heavy metal. So I don't see that as a particularly useful qualifier. I mean, what do you think about this, or anybody else who's attending? But Scott, I'm particularly interested. See what you think. I mean, could we actually? Does it make sense to place doom in there with death and thrash and black metal?
I think like before, like what we said before, if you say, well, they're thrash metal, that gives me a kind of a visual, or it gives me kind of a feeling of what it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think each of them, just by how they're named, I mean, if somebody hasn't heard doom metal, but you say doom metal, I mean, it just sounds nihilistic. I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
I mean, and then the point about it doing something new, that's anything that has a genre name to it. I agree with you. You know, anything that has a genre name is doing something different, and that's why it has a genre name than the other stuff. I mean, so if it's not like the other, you know, so
the other thing to say before we go into some like actual music stuff is there's a whole bunch of subgenres of doom metal that you could say are more extreme than the original stuff. If we're thinking about, you know, Black Sabbath, and then bands like Candlemas and Trouble and Saint Vitus and all of that. Because you do have black and doom metal, so there's some influence of black metal there. You have death doom, there's gothic doom, progressive doom, the whole stoner doom and sludge thing as well. And then there's some other subgenres that, you know, seem to be they're really going in a distinct direction, like drone. I mean, if something is got a drone to it, you know it, right?
yeah.
And you either like that sort of thing or it drives you nuts. Funeral, which goes even slower and has dirges. Epic doom, which okay, that's starting with Candlemas, but you know, Arguably, it becomes more extreme as it goes along, but I think we could say that for pretty much any other genre. There's this flowering or proliferation into a number of subgenres. And that might actually be a problem if people are like, well, I only listen to, Finnish this thing, it winds up being kind of a hipster phenomenon rather than being
right.
belonging to the whole metal community. So Ken says, can't speak for other countries, but here in the early days, a subset of what we today call traditional heavy metal developed fairly quickly. Band in that subset were defined by a very theatrical focus on hell, the devil, and medieval counter heresy. So yeah, we're going to talk about Witchfinder General, Pentagram, Pagan Alter. And yeah, I guess we do have to talk about the theatricality of it to some degree, on stage or album covers or matters like that. Witchfinder General got themselves in trouble with their album covers, as it turns out. We'll talk about that a bit later. But yeah, and I kind of think, and we're going to talk about this a bit more, that in a certain way, doom metal will be a counterculture within the broader sphere of heavy metal, because they're not doing the stuff that's popular. And you mentioned, Pentagram and Pagan Alter, they're going to make really cool recordings. They have people who like their music, but they don't get any records out for years and years and years because, it's not following the trends. When the new wave of British heavy metal is going on, it's not about like slowing things down. And I mean, they love the occult stuff, right? That's common across the board. But the bands that were like deliberately just making things slow and heavy, that's almost the opposite of what a lot of people associate with the new wave of British heavy metal. Ken says the theatrical and historical nature of those bands made them different to proto black metal, such as Venom. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Venom, good example. Lots of overlap with some of the lyrical content. Drugs, think about the song Angel Dust. Having sex, plenty of songs about that, like Teacher's Pet, for example. Lots of stuff about Satan and, witches and things along those lines. Too many things to mention. Andrew says, can we get clear on doom? Probably not at the very start. I mean, I think this is one of those sort of categories where you don't give a definition right off the bat, which is what Wikipedia does and other like sites copying it do. Andrew says, I tried to explain doom metal recently and I was almost at an impasse. I want to say atmospheric sadness that is heavy and slow, but I felt that didn't fit later. When I thought about it, Paradise Lost don't fit that maybe. What about everyone else? Do you know intuitively what doom metal is? So this is actually a good place to like do a little bit of philosophy about definitions. There's definitions that you can give that are, very nice and tight and precise and stuff like that. And almost anything that's really interesting, that almost never works, So sometimes, and it's not only Wittgenstein who talks about this, but he's associated with this notion of family resemblance definitions, where you might have like 10 different qualities and not everything has all those qualities, but you need to have like 5 or 6 of them to be a good case. And like a paradigm case might have 8 or 7 of those. And I think that's the way that we probably have to understand any genre within heavy metal. And so this is actually a great segue into talking about the musical traits. So, we talked about slowness. I mean, does that mean that there are no doom songs where portions of it speed up? No. And some doom metal is faster than others. But I would say that important to it, and Scott, you weigh out on this, is that I won't say that it has to have a groove, but there has to be something that is driving it, right? It could be plotting, it could be groovy, it could be menacing, but it's not going to be freeform jazz, and it's not going to be, let's just, see how fast we can go or anything like that. It's going to be very deliberate, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, um,
So we can
the,
talk about like some tempo, or I
yeah,
mean
but
that wouldn't really fall under phrasing, but
tempos, like even in Sabbath tunes, I was thinking they change,
yeah,
like you think, um, oh God, why am I forgetting? NIB, right?
yeah,
Um, so that's a kind of a cool riff, and then it's got the long chords, uh, and kind of the we call it the bridge, I guess. But then that signature doom like guitar part,
yeah,
with
yeah,
the steady drum beat that kind of comes after that, or even in War Pigs, that
yeah,
I mean but that's a gloom and doom song, even though it's got that characteristic.
yeah. You really have three different tempos, I think, in War Pigs, right?
Yeah.
Depending on what part of the song you're in. I mean, it's interesting. Andy and I saw recently a documentary with the guys in Black Sabbath, and they were talking about the fact that they would essentially, in songwriting, take parts of effectively two different songs and like squish them together, you know,
Hmm.
and that worked for them. They would write the parts individually and then be like, this works with this, so I
Yeah.
think Geezer Butler was saying, so with a Sabbath song, maybe you get 2 or 3 songs for the price of one.
Well, what I like about a lot of the Sabbath songs is, one of one of the characteristics is the tune itself is kind of gloomy, but then it's true of NIB, or if it's true of
Yeah.
uh, Paranoid, there's that real gloomy guitar riff that happens towards the end of the song that kind of repeats. And
That's another key thing. There's not a lot of emphasis on like, let's do something absolutely different from part of the song to part of the song. There will be a lot of repetition, right? But
yeah,
it's good. We could say it's good repetition. It's not repetition that bores you.
no,
You get into the song because musically you do know what's coming next in some
and
respect.
the and in Paranoid, the bass is a big part of that. If you think of the descending line, da da da, ba da da, da da
Yeah.
da, but the bass is kind of doom
Well, that's
like.
War Pigs, I think you're thinking of, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Am I? Yeah. So, but the
But
bass is moving down.
Paranoid is a great example of something else that's happening in a lot of these songs with the bass, which is that the bass is doing one of two things typically. It's mirroring the guitar riff, which adds a deep heaviness to it. And this shows up in later stuff. I mean, you see Cliff Burton doing this as well, but using like pedal notes to make it even heavier. Or the bass is doing something, and it's not virtuosic. I would say it's like competent, right? So like Geezer Butler, a lot of the times he's echoing Tony Iommi, but then he'll like go off on his own like fills, and he's got his runs. And like when Iommi is soloing, Butler's got to hold the entire riff structure together, unless they like put an extra guitar in there somewhere. But he's able to do that, I think. And a lot of these other bands that we're going to look at, it's interesting when you listen to them, you hear some stuff and you're like, oh, that's some good bass there.
Well, the bass defines the color. So if Tony Iommi is doing a repetitive riff at the end of one of their tunes,
Yeah.
the bass is moving, but the guitar part isn't. The bass is moving, maybe in a descending way, giving what the guitar is playing a different color.
Yeah. So
And it's
that's an important feature. You mentioned certain, like, let's call them musical motifs, right?
yeah,
The tritone, a lot of minor stuff in there, sometimes drawing on blues, sometimes classical. But I saw somebody talk about this. I like this phrase: the music creates a deep, immersive experience. And I think that works as a descriptor for what good doom metal winds up doing. Before we do the guitar demo, we should talk a little bit about like vocals, right? So as opposed to other, more extreme kinds of metal, the vocals are usually clean. There's not a lot of like weird stuff going on, super long reverbs, screaming, anything like that. And there's a lot of focus on conveying emotion. So, I mean, Ozzy's a great example of a doom metal singer. You think about like, that, oh God, please God, help me, and like his voice is declining as it's going on. Right. And the lyrical content, it tends to be very gloomy and pessimistic, which probably turned a lot of people off,
Well, it's perfect for metalheads.
Yes, a certain kind of metalhead. I don't think that this is great for the people who are like, yeah, man, I just want to go to the party and get drunk and laid, Right. They might not be as into that sort of thing. But
it creates a world. It's like you said just a few minutes ago. It creates an experience. It creates kind of a world to escape into. And I always felt that way about Sabbath. It was still to this day, I love listening to Sabbath, and they're inviting you into this world that's doomy.
Yeah, and even the later band. So I'm a huge fan of Witchfinder General, and you listen to a song like "Love on Smack," which is essentially about a prostitute who's going to die of her drug addiction, and the guy who is involved with her in some kind of way, and would like to save her and knows that he can't. There's a whole story that's being told there. The music supports it. And I mean, it's not like you have pictures in your head or something like a movie, but you are, for that scope of, I think, about 5 or so minutes, you are part of that narrative. And so, the kinds of themes that are coming up, the occult is really big. Also religion. I mean, one of the bands we're going to look at, Trouble, is drawing heavily on biblical imagery, but basically saying, Satan's going to lose. Magic, but not magic necessarily in the rainbow kind of, sort of theme way. Drug addiction, big thing there. Loneliness, sexuality, rebellion, a lot of references to literary tropes and the themes. I think somebody mentioned Milton just a little bit earlier, right? And then, the emotions and experiences. I guess you could make a happy doom metal song, but you'd really be pushing against the genre to do so. Yeah. So, suffering, fear, the song Black Sabbath is about fear, sadness, depression, anger, despair, existential angst. These are the sorts of things. So Ken says, yeah, doom bands. So I like this phrase, tend to engage in world building, perhaps more than other genres. I mean, I think you could say that like power metal is, to the degree that it's like sketching out these magical worlds with dragons and battles and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But, doom metal, it's, I guess you could say it's fantasy and it's horror together, So before we talk about guitar, Andrew has a question here that, Scott, you should take. Talking about the riffs, does that mean that there's a riff or tempo test? Like if you go above 80 beats per minute, does the doom moniker drop? And
I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we should probably distinguish between like a band that's doom metal and then a band that plays some doom metal songs. But what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I guess the literal test would be if we sped up a Black Sabbath tune, is it not doom anymore?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So you could think about covers that are done by bands that are not doom bands that are taking so many Sabbath covers, right? A great example of this is, and it's not about speeding it up, but it is about changing the genre. So one of my favorite songs of all time is Black Sabbath's Zero the Hero off of the Born Again album. And a friend of mine was like, oh man, you got to hear Cannibal Corpse's version of that. It's so heavy, heavier than the original. And I was like, okay, I haven't heard of these guys. Go ahead and play it for me. And it, it's not Black Sabbath. It's Cannibal Corpse, doing their growling kind of stuff. And I was like, well, they're playing the song all right, but this doesn't grip me in the same way. And you can have a song that's heavier. Actually, I'll use another example, not from doom metal, but you can have a song that's heavier, but not as good as the original. So Diamond Head's Am I Evil is not as heavy as Metallica's Am I Evil, but I think Diamond Head's version is the superior song from a metal perspective, So
oops, wait, let me go down. I wanna wait. Is it above Ken's? So, yeah, does that mean there's a riff tempo test? So the tempo test, I think God, that's a really great question. I don't know if we can quantify it like that. Moniker drop, who removes it? He says, yeah, so like 80 beats per minute, for example. I just think, I don't know, the only way I can answer that is if we were to hear a version of, say, a Sabbath tune, and when we said it's not doom now, we would know it, but it could be, I guess it could be the tempo, it could be the sound.
Yeah.
A lot of people get the classic stuff wrong with using just too much distortion or what they didn't use in the past. And, people always say musicians, or they'll always do this lazy thing where they say, just do this. The audience won't notice the difference. They won't notice the difference. And my first thing is, well, if they're going to notice the difference, they have to hear them side by side.
Yeah.
And you're just saying they're going to get what we give them. But I do believe anybody that's a fan of the music, even if it's something they can't explain, will know when it's not that thing anymore. Right. Wow,
I really crosses a threshold and ceases being what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think definitely the guitar sound's a huge thing. Tempo is a big thing about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's jump into the demo part. But before we do, I want to ask you a question that just occurred to me, Scott. So, we can talk about what the drums are doing, what the vocals are doing, what the bass is doing. There's even keyboards in some of them, like the Epic Doom stuff. It strikes me that really in doom metal, the guitar is probably the most important of all the instruments for making it doom metal. Do you think I'm wrong about that, or?
I mean, when I think about Tony Iommi, how instrumental his riffs and how he played, I mean, he's not the only thing that's important, but but I had thought of demonstrating something for everybody just to see how we hear the different sounds, and if we agree a certain sound would contribute to doom metal. But I mean, I could go right to it. So a little quick history. Some of you will probably know this, but I'll say it anyway. Fuzz pedals were like the only distortion back in the day. But everybody always thought it was a fuzz pedal that Tony Iommi used it. He didn't. He did something else, but he got the sound. So I want to just kind of A-B. Oops, not that. So here's like a normal distortion pedal. So if I go, or okay, that's a normal distortion. This is a fuzz pedal, which I attribute. Oops. Why are we? Oh, which I attribute to the doom sound. So like when I hear this kind of thing, this kind of pedal. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. When I hear this pedal with longer notes.
Oh, Andy says turn it up a little bit, Scott.
Oh, okay. All right, let me do the first one again then, if that's okay. So. This is the distortion. right, so cool, but here's a fuzz. I don't know if you can hear the difference so much on the.
It sounds as if there's more low end in the fuzz, like it preserves or adds more of that in. And this is not the right description, but the notes kind of bleed into each other a bit.
It's a little less focused than the distortion. It's kind of like
yeah.
So when I hear these kind of and you like those two together, you have to kind of like control it differently, but the notes definitely have much of a different, like a whole different character. So there's a couple things a couple bands you had mentioned to me last week that I checked out, and the first thing I noticed was that fuzz guitar sound to a clipping over different amp. Yeah, well that's what Tony used actually, Ken. He cranked his amp, and then he had what was called a solo Dallas, which was a booster that went into it to push the amp even further. So you're absolutely right about that. That was excellent. Yeah.
So he was using something that was a preamp going into the amp then?
It was
the amp to the speakers, right?
Well, he would. So if you turn up an amp, the more you turn up the tube amp, the more you put the tubes into distress. And that's where you get kind of the distorted, overdriven sound with the old ones. If you put more signal into the amp from your guitar, it's going to hit the tubes much harder, more than the amp, So he had something that boosted the signal a lot higher and boosted certain frequencies. So sometimes you got the I would call it a little less focused sound. But when I hear other bands, I'm like, well, that's a fuzz. They're influenced by Sabbath.
Yeah.
I would call this doom. That's got one of the family resemblance things to it, is the longer notes, and it just sounds gloomier. It just by itself, and it's just by design. It's some of this is what was available back then. I wonder if there was different things available, what it would sound like if he was messing with something different.
If Tony Iommi was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about. So a lot of these other bands that we're going to talk about, they all make reference to Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath is like a central nexus for this. But you wonder, okay, so what could they take? Like they never see these guys, or maybe they see them play in concert, but they're like good ways back from the stage. They can't see precisely what's going on with the setup. So how do they have like a good ear, and they're like, okay, I tinker around with the amp and like settings and stuff like that, and I'll figure out how to get this sound,
I've done it with recordings.
Okay.
So like I'll take a recording, and we all know before the internet, there was no looking up what gear people used.
Yeah.
So the more you know about how the effect pedals or effects work, let's just say it's strictly I want to get a Sabbath sound. Let's say I had access to a bunch of pedals. I would do exactly what everybody here has been doing, is noticing, okay, this sounds a bit clippy it sounds like it's clipping a bit on the recording. It sounds a little unfocused, but still very pure, because like a lot of the notes are being hung on to a little longer, right? And or they might double the part. But I think God, I just completely lost track of what I was saying. Where was I?
Well, you were talking about like if you had a lot of pedals at your disposal, how you could try to replicate this sort of thing.
Yeah, and a lot of people get it wrong because we've talked about this in the past. You know, you mentioned earlier the example of AC/DC. You hear bands cover Sabbath or AC/DC or Deep Purple, and they're using so much distortion just because they feel the music's really heavy. It must be all this distortion, and they always get it so wrong. You know, that the sound is heavy in Sabbath, the sound is heavy in Deep Purple or AC/DC, but there's different reasons. Like you had mentioned with Deep Purple, that, you know, like the organ sound would fatten it up, and of course the bass fattens things up. So yeah, I mean, you have to really,
you know, even like Judas Priest stuff from the 70s, which is really heavy. You know, you think about Sin After Sin and Stained Class. So mid late 70s stuff, no distortion available. And you know, later Judas Priest stuff, like think about Defenders of the Faith and Screaming for Vengeance, all distortion, right? And they are heavier to some degree, but not all that heavier than the cleaner but overdriven stuff from those two albums, you know.
And I prefer it. You know, it's like I really like the early Saxon stuff because
really? Because of a lack of
well, like Denim and Leather.
Yeah.
Like that's a great guitar tone on that album. So I tend to like the classic stuff. I don't dislike the other because, you know, amp companies as time went on would make their amps with more distortion. Oh, you could press this button and get distortion now, but there was no, back in the day, you would just turn it all up and put the tubes in distress. I wanted to point out really quick, you had used the word tritone, and maybe somebody that watches this may not know what a tritone is. It's in the song Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
So tone meaning a whole step. So if I go a whole step, which is skipping a fret, I'll skip another fret. Here, that's 3 whole tones, and it's this note. So there's your tritone, and that was kind of a really good call there because that's one of the doomier songs they do.
Yeah, it's hard to beat that. Well, let's talk about the early 70s. And of course, you know, we've already mentioned a lot about Black Sabbath, but we have to talk about them some more because they're so absolutely central. And it's kind of funny. There is a now common narrative that doom metal is there from the very start of heavy metal in Black Sabbath, which is completely true. But that there won't really be any other doom metal except for, like, you know, an underground band like Pentagram until the early 80s, when more bands will start playing that style. Not completely true. So we will talk about some other bands that are arguably doom bands in the 70s. And then, you know, which Sabbath songs are particularly doom metal? I mean, which songs aren't is a better question, but the ones that get picked out a lot are, of course, the song Black Sabbath itself, Iron Man, Sweet Leaf. I mean, you've got the slow tempo, the plotting thing, Hand of Doom, Electric Funeral, Lord of This World, Into the Void, War Pigs, as you were playing a little bit earlier, NIB, great example there, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Snowblind is one of my favorite from that. And one way that you can tell, like, which ones are actually really doomy is they get covered by doomy bands. So, like, Flower Traveling Band covers Black Sabbath, right? Or Galaxis will cover Sweet Leaf. And I got to thinking about, like, later Sabbath stuff. Did Sabbath quit being doomy when Ozzy was replaced by Ronnie James Dio, or Ian Gillan had his one little jaunt with them? And I think the answer is no. You know, the Ronnie James Dio stuff, I would say for the most part, is more up tempo than the stuff from the 70s. but you've got like Children of the Sea. I'd say that's a doom song.
Yeah.
Only is the word. Sign of the Southern Cross, Falling Off the Edge of the World, and then another one of my favorites, The Devil Cried, which is a later composition, but still Sabbath, right? And then I would say on Born Again, Disturbing the Priest is definitely a doom metal song, as is Zero the Hero. It's got the do 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 do. There's like that riff and bass line. It's very heavy. It's slow. Even the guitar solos on it are slow. You've got that. I'm not going to try to replicate it by humming or whistling it, but you can just listen to the album, and it's and it's a long song too. It's like, I think, close to 7 minutes. Has all of the elements that we're looking for there, except a first class singer in Ian Gillan. So
Yeah.
So other early 70s bands, we listened to quite a lot of early stuff, and there are some that some people want to talk about as being doom bands that probably aren't, but you could say are influential, like Blue Cheer, right? A lot of people reference them, or Budgie. Flower Traveling Band, I don't think they're really a doom band. Bang, Sir Lord Baltimore. Maybe some of their songs could be considered early doom. And then I had Scott listen to Atomic Rooster's Death Walks Behind You. It gets talked about a lot. I think Scott has succeeded in convincing me that the people who are saying it's doom metal are actually wrong with some of the things that you pointed out. But I will say it's a doomy song. It's got a sense of menace to it. But you were saying it's more prog than, and you actually, I think you mentioned it's kind of Jethro Tull-esque, right?
It reminded me of, but the part in that one too was there was a fuzz guitar in a lot of those tracks that were like, sometimes sustaining just the single note rather than the chord. And I said, well, and I'm thinking, it kind of sounded, that one sounded a little bit more proggy, a little like some of the Jethro Tull stuff, but the fuzz was really apparent to me. Like that jumped out as what you would call a family relation, what you were talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't, I guess next to Sabbath, it wasn't doom to me. It wasn't.
That's a good point. So it's often what it's contrasted with. Sabbath is a paradigm instance. These are kind of borderline.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe, and this is pure conjecture, maybe the people in the forums and websites and stuff who want to talk about this, they have a much bigger rubric for what they think counts as doom metal. Because I've noticed some people like bringing in certain like death metal bands and saying, yeah, this is doom metal. And you're like, this isn't doom metal,
Although, is Aqualung doom metal?
Well, I mean, let's think about it. So lyrical content, it's pretty gloomy. That's a song, right? It's pretty pessimistic.
It's got that tritone kind of riff. Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
And then it's got the end thing where it's just a guitar solo, or the middle, the guitar solo. But I don't know, maybe
I think that it's more like I'm not even sure we could call it metal.
Right?
But it's sort of like how we've been talking about heavy metal and metal adjacent stuff.
Yes.
Like Bad Company is not heavy metal, but if you like heavy metal stuff, you probably also listen to Bad Company as well. Maybe Jethro Tull is like that.
Yeah, well, it's like when we were talking about the last one with Triumph a couple times ago. It's like there's so much that doesn't fit into heavy metal, but if you like metal, you probably like Triumph.
Yeah, so Ken says, I'd agree bands such as Jethro Tull and Uriah Heep did some doom adjacent work, but overall we're not primarily doom metal bands. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, Ken.
Some people have tried to say that like some early Uriah Heep stuff counts as doom metal. I'm not convinced by that myself. But let's talk about some bands that there's a good case to be made that they are doom metal. So the best one is Iron Claw, and they are a really interesting band. They're from Scotland, formed in 1969. The basses have that fuzzy, distorted. I mean, the guitars have that fuzzy, distorted, riffing. The drums are this, great full sound. They do some cool soloing, and they were inspired by Black Sabbath. Surprise, surprise, right? So Alex Wilson is the guy who formed it. He recruited his some buddies, Jimmy and Ian, and they go see Black Sabbath's performance at Dumfries in November 1969. And then they're like, yeah, this is the kind of stuff we want to do. And when Black Sabbath's first album comes out, they cover it. And so they're very consciously constructing their sound around them. And unfortunately, and this is going to be a very common theme with doom metal in its early years, they don't go anywhere. They record a lot, and master tapes and bootlegs circulate around. People like this stuff, and then they find out that people are making money off of their recordings, and then they're like, yeah, okay, we better pay attention to this. So the album Iron Claw, I would say a lot of the stuff on there really is good doom metal. Another really funny one. So Blue Cheer, they had a guy who played with them for a bit called Randy Holden. He came in the band, he played with them, then he went out of the band. And the original Blue Cheer version of the song Fruit and Icebergs is not doom metal. It's a bit softer. Randy Holden's version on his album Population 2 really sounds like doom metal. And a couple other songs on that album could be considered doom metal as well. So sometimes it's how you transpose the song, what elements you're bringing to it. There was another band called Sudden Death, and you can find their 8-song demo out there. They were from Pasadena, California. They were part of an artist search by Epic Records seeking America's answer to Black Sabbath, right? And so they got to record a demo, and it's pretty doomy. And then they just kind of disappeared. The demo reemerged in 1995. The band didn't know anything about it. And then finally somebody's like, hey, they're playing your music, you should check this out. And then of course the band was like, hey, you're also, we should get some royalties from this sort of thing. We should actually make some money. So I think that's part of it. And then there was this band Galaxis. And I'm not saying they're a doom metal band, but they play sort of heavy psychedelic blues. They didn't manage to release a lot, but they did record a lot of stuff. And I would say a few of their songs, True Experience, Take the War, and Pontus, I would say those are doomy songs that could be considered doom metal, but they're not a doom metal band as such. Ken says, oh, interesting. Shout out to the other band that was called Iron Maiden. Their one and only album called Maiden Voyage was vintage 70s proto-doom, heavily influenced by blues. Yeah, so good thing they were gone by the time that Iron Maiden wanted to come out, and
right.
Start getting some traction, because so many bands had to rename themselves when they discovered that there was another band. Sort of like being an actor, right? You become a Screen Actor Guild actor, you got to often change your name, especially if you have something like John Smith. You're screwed then. You better become, John O'Smithy or something like that.
I have a friend. He went out to LA and he acts. He's on commercials and he's like in TV shows and stuff. But he had to add his middle name because his name was a producer's or a director's name or something. So the solution to that was he has to use his middle name. He didn't change his name, but now it's
now he's basically stuck with it forever. He can't pull like a John Cougar Mellencamp, John Mellencamp sort of thing, right?
That's always a classic one.
Yeah.
I have a quick question that we should have asked earlier. so we were talking about the band, we were talking about the elements of doom. So Ozzy did an album called Speak of the Devil, and it's all Sabbath tunes. I would definitely say it's still gloomy, it's still doom, but it's by entirely different players. Brad Gillis, I love Brad Gillis, but he's nothing to do with Tony Iommi. He was copying the parts.
Yeah.
What do we think about Speak of the Devil? Were we fans of it? I think I liked it when I was younger, but
I haven't listened to it since forever, so I would have to go by very fuzzy memories of it. But that's actually a really great question. If you change the sound of the guitar, and you might also be changing the tempo to some degree.
Yeah, that's true.
Or the phrasing, right? Could you lose the doom aspect of it by changing those things too much?
I mean, there were certain things with the riffs, like you said, the tritone. I'm picturing Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, and that still sounds gloomy. A lot of it still sounds gloomy, but it doesn't. Yeah, I guess if you're a purist, the sounds aren't right. The band is entirely different.
Yeah.
I don't know. I try to throw it out there.
Here's a kind of counter question for you, Scott, because you're a big fan of Dio's later albums that I think get a lot less listening to than Holy Diver and Last in Line. I've seen some people saying that some of the stuff that Ronnie James Dio was doing with his solo band on, like Magica and Lock Up the Wolves and stuff like that could be considered doom metal because it's slowed down. It's got the heaviness to it, the plotting to it. I don't know that there's maybe. So here's a question, actually 2 questions with that then. So is there any like doom metal in Ronnie James Dio's later albums? And then could anything off of Last in Line or Holy Diver be considered doom metal, even though Dio is not a doom metal band? Like, is Egypt, the Chains Are On, doom metal? It's long, it's plotting, it's super heavy, it's,
I would agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah. On Lock Up the Wolves, I would argue Evil on Queen Street is doom. Okay. And there's another one. There's there's one other that I would consider doomy. There's one that's because Evil on Queen Street is kind of like a slow shuffle, but it's got this guitar riff that's doomy. Yeah, I would say some stuff on there. Magica's like more, for lack of a better word, if I'm thinking of he used to do that album in its entirety. That's less doomy. That would be Magica. It was a great album. And Master of the Moon I really liked a lot. Little more poppy. I don't know how else to describe it, but I just thought
Sacred Heart was more poppy too, by comparison to the 2 before it, right?
It is Sacred Heart doom. Da-da.
Oh, that particular song?
Yeah. That's because the riff is pretty doomy.
Yeah. It's interesting too to think about that sort of stuff. The guitarist really makes it. So, Dio, we've talked about this before, his original choice for the band was Jake E. Lee, and that would have been awesome. But I kind of think it wouldn't have actually gone as well. I think Dio made the right choice in getting Vivian Campbell and then later Craig Goldie on, because he thought that Jake E. Lee, his stuff was just a little bit too embellished, a little too, technical, right?
Jake, you mean?
Yeah, and Ozzy wanted something that was more straightforward, you listen to those early albums with Vivian Campbell, and it's just, there's no bad song on those early albums at all. I I don't know. I mean, I'm sure Jake E. Lee would have done a great job with it. I don't know that they would have been as good or even as heavy, you know?
I wonder just personality wise, because Jake ended up writing a lot of the Ozzy tunes. He wrote the riffs, he wrote a lot of the tunes. We know how the story goes. But if you notice, Vivian Campbell was young and he had his fast parts in there, but he wasn't afraid to hang on a note for a long time. And that was gutsy in the 80s as a guitar player. And I'm thinking that
rather than shredding, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Like the Last in Line solo, it gets going, but like he'll hold a whole note, 4 beats on a note in a solo. And I think that it worked because I think he was open to what Dio had to suggest. I'm not sure Jake E. Lee would have been. The working relationship with Ozzy was different. He came up with the stuff, and then it was stolen from him, as the story goes. But I think so
many others. I mean,
yeah, exactly. But I think you're right. I think I as much as I love Jake E. Lee, he's a great guitar player. I don't know if he would have been the right guy for Dio. I mean, we will never know, but it would be the albums would be different. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So, Andrew has an interesting follow-up. Isn't Dio lyrically too positive for Doom? Master of the Moon is perhaps the darkest I've heard Dio lyrically. Do we count lyrics as contribution to Doom? Yeah, I mean, you can definitely say that there's like a whole bunch of themes, right? And if you were like singing a song, even if it's got like the heavy guitars and plotting, and you're like, I'm going to the candy store. It's going to be so nice. I'm going to get some Jolly Ranchers and sit out by the beach and watch the ships come in. No, it's not going to be Doom, right?
That would be like a parody video. That would be hysterical. The Doom music with that kind of lyric content would be kind of like a parody video.
Yeah. It'd be pretty incongruous, I would say. But I don't know. I think Dio has a lot of very dark content. There are inspirational things like Hungry for Heaven, but that's more poppy. But Egypt, the Chains Were On, man, that is a pretty pessimistic song. There's a lot of things that are kind of neutral, like, I Speed at Night, We Rock. They are upbeat, and We Rock is too fast to be I Speed at Night. They couldn't be doom metal.
I put that under Anthem.
But Breathless, Rainbow in the Dark is not an optimistic song. What are the other ones off of that album? Don't Talk to Strangers, Invisible, which is about somebody struggling with like a sexual identity crisis, very ahead of its time. There's some other ones. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say Dream Evil. That wasn't a bad album.
Yeah.
And it was more epic than Doom, but All the Fools Sail Away. That's a great but the song Dream Evil, also the one that starts the album, that album didn't do well. And I don't think it did well, but I always liked it. But All the Fools Sail Away, it's kind of it's gloomy, but I wouldn't call it doom. It's more of not a power ballad. I don't know what I would call that. Just a heavy, slower tune.
Yeah. Well, I think we talked about that one when we did the episode on power ballads, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Dio is one of the people that didn't phone it in when he did new albums,
Oh yeah.
And when he went on the road, he played. I mean, when he put out Magica, he played the whole album and then some hits. And I really admired that about any artist that's that will go kind of stand by their stuff. I mean, I've always said that, and it's a little off topic, but I think
that actually is on point, though. Talking about doom, right? If you're doing doom metal, that's what you're doing, right? You're not looking for all the, groupies and chicks and stuff, and the popularity and getting on MTV or anything like that. And you
Right.
might not even get like a lot of respect from, the larger heavy metal community. You are, you're committed to something that you feel matters. And so this is actually a great segue into talking about some of these bands that labored in obscurity for years and years. So let's talk about Pentagram. So, really massively important in the doom metal scene. They've had kind of a resurgence lately to the point that Bobby Liebling has become a meme or a meme template, let's say. And so they're formed in 71, and they're formed explicitly to play heavy music. And unfortunately, they're not in a great place to do so. Alexandria, Virginia, and they're not going to like move to LA. And even if they did move to LA, they probably would have gotten like, not a lot of play or anything like that.
There was
And
countless
so,
bands in LA.
what's that?
There was just countless bands in LA. It's just was over, it was oversaturated for bands trying to break out.
Yeah, but I think for the kind of stuff that these bands were playing, people probably would have been less receptive, especially like record producers, But they play a lot and they record a lot. They go through a lot of lineup changes as well. By 1975, they're actually able to have a demo session, but unfortunately, Bobby Liebling and Murray Krugman, who is connected with Blue Oyster Cult, can't see eye to eye on the production. And then Liebling and his girlfriend get arrested. So this is a problem for the rest of the band, in part because Liebling owns the rights to the name Pentagram, so they can't go on without him. But meanwhile, they're like producing lots and lots of music, something that we're going to see like also with Pagan Alter and some of these other bands. So supposedly by the mid to late 70s, they have 80 original songs, almost all of them written or co-written by Liebling. There's demos, bootlegs floating around out there. They don't actually get a record out until 1985. And that's Pentagram, put out by Pentagram Records, and then Day of Reckoning in 1987. But, we've talked in the past about the tape trading networks. So a lot of these bands were getting play precisely by people making eventually pretty shitty copies of tapes of tapes of tapes of tapes, There's another band. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to interject, which we didn't mind back in the day. We were just like,
well, even somebody had a cassette, right, or an album, and then we'd record it on our stereo, dub it if it was a cassette. It usually wouldn't turn out like perfect, but we'd be like, that's good enough. Our expectations were not that high.
We were just that hungry to have the music and go into that world as metalheads, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
I think, of course we wanted our own real copy, but still, getting that. I've had some pretty bad ones that I listened to a lot, and I talked to my friend about it, who's, also, metalhead, and he said it just didn't matter that it, like you had it and you wanted the real copy. Like my Docking Back for the Attack was a crappy 13th generation, but I thought it was so cool sounding. So yeah, I just want to interject that as metalheads we were dedicated to it's the music, man, it's the music.
Yeah, I had all sorts of you'd buy a 45-minute on each side cassette, because that would contain just about any album that was going to come out at that time.
That's
and
right.
Then you'd have like a buddy who happened to have the stuff that you wanted, and you'd give him your cassette and he'd give it back to you after about like a week, and it'd be labeled on each side. If you were really lucky, he'd put like inside the cassette there'd be like a little bit of paper, and it would like say what the songs were, but probably not, and you wouldn't have any place to go get the actual listing of the songs, so yeah. Ken says, yeah, true. Musical fidelity very much took a back seat to sharing new and interesting albums.
But that's
quite true. Yeah.
I just that was so exciting I just remember that being exciting, hearing something. I think we've all been to a friend's house and heard something and said, I need to hear that tonight. I need to hear that all night. You know, what is that? And then you get your copy, and then eventually you buy your own copy. But you know, it's just the excitement of getting hold of it is that's almost like a snow day.
Yeah, that's a good metaphor. So another band that is so some of these bands aren't really real bands, you could say. There's a band called Bedaemon, and they are an offshoot of Pentagram. Before Randy Palmer joined them, he wanted to make a recording of his own material. So he recruited the guys from Pentagram, and he's like, I'm going to join your band, but you join my band for a minute. And they made some recordings. Some of their songs got brought to Pentagram, which is, you know, interesting. But that's their whole story. And then, you know, as things are moving on in the late 70s, we're going to see more and more bands coming out. Trouble is a really interesting one. I hadn't actually listened to them before I started doing the research for this, but there's some great stuff. They were from Chicago, really solid doom metal. I would say they focus pretty exclusively on religious themes. And interestingly, they did not like this at all. But Metal Blade, who they got to, you know, record with, marketed them as white metal, as sort of like the opposite of black metal. And I guess that would make sense if you had like people who were playing black metal stuff, but it was actually Christian themes. Right. But it's doom metal. It's very clearly doom metal, Sabbath influenced. Really great stuff. They start touring around in the Midwest. They get a record deal, and they managed to put out 3 really solid albums in the 1980s, starting in 1984. Then there's St. Vitus, formed in Los Angeles in 1978. They were originally called Tyrant, and they changed to St. Vitus, you know, motivated by Black Sabbath song St. Vitus Dance. And they have an original lineup. They're going to eventually replace their vocalist in 1986. And what they started out as originally, so if you listen to their really early stuff, it's sort of like a mix of Black Sabbath and Blue Cheer with Judas Priest and Black Flag. And interestingly, so this is why I said like Pentagram going to LA would not have worked out for them, which is kind of pure speculation on my part. St. Vitus didn't get any play from the metal community in LA. It was the punk and hardcore community that welcomed them more than anything else. And, you know, they put out a whole bunch of great albums, 4 of them in the 1980s, St. Vitus, Hallow's Victims, Born Too Late, and Mournful Cries. So I think they're, you know, a really solid band. Then we have Candlemas or however a Swede would pronounce it. Probably, you know, some weird thing that we're all getting wrong. Yeah, right. They're a Swedish band, and they're formed by the bassist, songwriter, and band leader Leif Edling, who adds some people. And they actually use a session vocalist for their first album, which was massively important, Epicus Doomicus Metallicus in 1986. And they go through some lineup changes as quite a few of these. You know, another thing you could say about a lot of these doom metal bands, core players, and then, you know, like more peripheral people that go in and out, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, some people, here's an interesting idea. And I forget exactly what site I took this from, but it's a quote. It could be argued that Candlemas' Epicus Doomicus Metallicus is the first Doom album on purpose. St. Vitus, Trouble, Witchfinder General, and the rest who came before had the tag applied retrospectively, but here's a line being drawn where influence becomes intent. Okay, I can buy that. That makes sense. Right. If you're calling it Doomicus. You know.
I love the title.
Yeah.
You know, that's interesting on purpose because, if we go back to the original, if we go back to Sabbath, they were trying something new And I'd love to hear what Tony Iommi would have to say about it. He might just be, I don't know, we were just writing songs we like to write, you know, it could have been the by accident part.
Yeah. Ken says, Epicus Doomicus Metallicus, surely the ultimate doom metal album name. And yeah, that's pretty tough to top. Going back to Trouble, though, I will say Psalm 9, great title for an album, because you're like, what the hell is this, like some Christian band? And it is Christian music, but it's Christian, let's say in the cool sense, not like, oh God, I love you so much, everything's gonna be great with Jesus,
Right.
It's more like the world is crap, you got to watch out for demons. Fortunately, good will triumph over evil, but it's going to suck for a while. And they're drawing on all of this biblical imagery. I mean, you read like people who really took the Bible seriously, but weren't like fundamentalists, and they often have really wild things to say. So Ken says, I disagree. It was the first deliberate doom album. Many previous albums had deliberately thematic album titles. Epicus may have been the first self-referential doom album title. Okay, so yeah, referring to the genre itself, just like you see after a while bands, we did a whole episode about this a while back, where we called it meta metal music, where a band is writing a song and they explicitly talk about how they're doing heavy metal music in the song, right?
Right.
So, yeah, Candlemas is signaling we're doing doom metal.
We're doing, right? Yeah. Well, they're saying, yeah, it's right in the title.
Yeah. Imagine if they hadn't managed to do it, though.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, they self-refer to it.
Yeah,
I guess it is a hard. I guess Ken's right in the sense that it is hard to make an absolute claim. That one, but I think the title has a lot to do with it too. But I don't know.
I mean, there are other albums. So we have Nightfall, Ancient Dreams, Tales of Creation. Those are pretty straightforward album titles, definitely fit into the doom metal spectrum, but they're not like saying, we are going to rock you with some doom metal here, buddies,
Right.
Oh, well, yeah.
It reminds me of things that might not be so true, like calling your album Metal Health.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say Quiet Riot is heavy metal, but are they the heaviest of heavy metal at the time? No,
They were poppy metal, I thought.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Arguably glam,
Okay, yeah.
Glammy metal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But they were like more rebellion and party.
Or like we talked about last session. So Lee Aaron putting out an album called Heavy Metal Queen, which is metallic-y, but it's not really that heavy, that's a good example of that. I mean, put that next to Metallica's Metal Militia, right? Definitely heavy metal stuff, right? Yeah. It's got the sound of marching feet in it, So. All right, well, back to other bands. So some of you already brought up Pagan Alter. Pagan Alter is a really interesting one because, again, great band, great music, record a lot. It's a father and son kind of thing. Terry Jones and his son Alan, they start out in 1978 in London. And they have all sorts of cool stuff in their stage show, an altar, human skulls, burning incest, crosses turned upside down, black candles, all and their music is all pretty much oriented around those sorts of things. And and they just don't get the traction that they need. So they do release a demo album during the new wave of British heavy metal, which gets put onto vinyl eventually. And like a lot of other people, they're bootlegs and recordings circulate around. They don't actually make any money on that stuff, and then eventually discover that people are into their stuff years later. Now, they had an advantage that a lot of other bands didn't have. Usually you go to the studio and you record, and you got to book some time, and who knows what happens to the tapes afterwards, right? Maybe the studio keeps them, maybe they go into some archive, they could even get recorded over. These guys had a recording studio in their house. So like people who live in a house, they just accumulated all this crap. You just put it down in the basement here in the Midwest, or up in the attic, or, so they, they kept all the stuff. And then years later, when people were like, do you have any more cool stuff? They were like, yeah, we got tons of it. So they've been, releasing stuff over the years. Ken says, I think Terry sadly passed away sometime in the past few years. Yeah. He might've been one of the ones, somebody that we were looking at died during the COVID years. And that might've been him, or it might've been a little bit earlier.
Oh,
so, but they've been, the Sun has been releasing additional recorded stuff. So, there've been quite a few albums coming out. Good stuff, very doomy. And then, Witchfinder General, formed in 1979 by this guy Zeeb Parks on vocals and Phil Cope on guitar. They went through 3 bassists and 3 drummers between the years that they were active, 1979 to 1984. And it's funny when you read interviews with them, or at least interviews with Phil Cope, because Zeeb Parks seems to have kind of dropped off the map. He says very explicitly, we didn't have a clue what the hell we were doing. We were just like, going from one debacle to another, and we didn't know what we were doing recording. When we recorded our second album, it was like a totally different experience than the first album, because there was actually like a producer there who knew what they were doing. First album was recorded in like 2 days. Second album, it was a couple weeks recording it. So things like that. They put out an EP called Soviet Invasion, and then 2 really great albums, Death Penalty and Friends of Hell. And then they disbanded in 1984. And they were trying to work on a new album. It never got a name. They were actually like going to expand their sound, introduce some keyboards, in part because Phil Cope's dad was learning keyboards at the time. He said, yeah, Dad'll play on our album. And it just never got actually recorded, although they wrote material. And the thing that killed them, apparently, was their album covers. And I don't know if Spinal Tap was referencing this, with Smell the Glove.
Yeah.
It has to be the Black Album. So if you actually look at Witchfinder General's album covers, there's some nudity. It's witches who are being dragged away by witchfinders. Yeah, so Ken says their covers tended to feature semi-naked women. I guess bare boobs were enough to get them in trouble, and like some record stores wouldn't carry their stuff, and that wound up being, it wasn't like they all got together and they're like, damn it, we can't win. But it was probably like a precipitating factor,
Right.
And, these random things that pop up. And it kind of fits the ethos of doom metal. The world is unfair. You're probably not going to live or make it. We'll just try to do what we can in the meantime.
Right.
Andrew said, so this is an interesting thing to bring up. Something I've noticed is the genre's working class roots. I would ask, to what extent did the factory closures, shift work routines, and broader economic precarity, Yomi's fingers on the factory floor of late 1970s, Birmingham, Chicago, and similar centers, directly shaped doom metal's trademark slowness, lyrical fatalism, and dense fuzz tones? And in light of that, should we understand early doom metal less as a purely musical evolution and more as a form of proletarian protest rendered in distortion.
Not to interject, this is Andrew, this is great. I want to add something that I forgot to bring up earlier. We all know that Tony Iommi lost his fingertips.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that he tuned lower, right? The lower tunings, that's part of the sound.
Yeah.
Tuning, was because his, it was easier on his fingers. So
he said it hurt him to play.
Yeah. So if the strings were looser, tuned down to a lower thing, that actually was more comfortable for him to play. So, if he hadn't lost his fingers, would that have been just standard tuning? With a lot of bands, it's intentionally go lower, it's heavier. Tune your guitar lower so it's a heavier sound. But that's an excellent observation.
About the working class thing, yeah, I think that's quite true. I mean, you do so if you're like Pagan Alter, right, and you can afford to have a recording studio in your house. You own a house. Recording equipment isn't that cheap, but that could be like your whole hobby. That could be like what you do. Just like we have working class people who can afford to, I don't know, play Warhammer 40K, and that's kind of expensive with all the little miniature figures, or you could be into glass blowing or something like that. But here's a question that's there in Andrew's thing. So the economic precarity, and not just late 70s, but I mean Black Sabbath is early 70s. Black Sabbath is coming out, as I think a lot of these bands are, of this kind of hippie-ish, let's be against war, flower power, psychedelic stuff. And they're like, well, this is kind of bullshit, Summer of Love didn't turn out so great for all of us. We do like getting high and drunk and, getting to have some, romance or sex every once in a while, but things are pretty crap overall, right? And the let's all pull together and wear our bright colors and sing happy songs thing. That's not doing it for any of them either. There is that sense of there's a lot of fantasy and horror elements, but maybe they're being more realistic about the world that they're in. The factories are closing. The jobs are going away. They're not going to come back. The environment is being ruined.
I had a point to follow up on this. Yes, but I also I'm blanking on. Okay, after Woodstock, what's the one that failed that the Rolling Stones did the next summer?
Oh, where the Hells Angels, the
Hells Angels
people. Yeah, I don't know.
I forgot. Does anybody remember what that festival was called? I think there's also a reaction to, and I always say Blue Oyster Cult's Last Days of May was the first song was the saying, okay, this isn't romantic. We're romanticizing drugs and sex and everything, but people die from it. Yes, thank you, Mark.
Oh, Altamont, yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about coming out of that, not only the stuff that's going on economically, but coming out of this flower power thing. It's not what we thought it was. It was a perfect time for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
On top of all of it. I think it all shaped it shaped the sound. That's a great point.
Another thing that kind of fits in with that, and this is much broader, so it's not even just about heavy metal. If you're, so think about Judas Priest's song "Breaking the Law," which I think thematizes this. You don't have anything. You don't have any social status. You drift around. Feels as if nobody cares if I live or die. So I may as well begin to get some action in my life. The music and the heaviness. So there's when you're in a performance or you're just sitting by yourself in your room and listening to it, it does. So we talked about world building earlier and a sense of something. I think it does also make you feel like you belong to something like a community, even though the themes are loneliness and alienation and things like, negative experiences like that. You're like, yeah, we're all miserable together.
Well, the music on the albums puts it out there. It's like, you're isolated, especially back, with no internet or anything, but you quietly suffered with that.
Yeah.
And then you have these albums that you relate to, the lyrics, and and then it brings everybody together at the concerts that are kind of identifying with that, the isolation,
But I remember, like, for me, heavy metal being kind of something that fit into my otherwise largely crappy life in the 1980s, as a kid living out in the sticks, just trying to get through school and get done so I could go join the army. Because of the heaviness, because of what the music allowed for you, it filled some kind of space.
Yes, I'd agree.
And I think for other people it was other things. Maybe that's part of what attracted some people to punk instead, or to certain kinds of new wave,
I think, we've said it a lot, they used to do news people. I saw one before where they used to do, what's this metalhead? What are these metalheads? And they start interviewing like kids at high schools, and of course they were trying to push it the satanic route, but they kind of,
or the drug abuse route, right?
Drug abuse route,
but they're all a bunch of druggies.
Exactly, but you saw them. We all had something in common, and it's kind of like the old, you're at the mall and you see somebody with a Sabbath shirt, and you're like, yeah, man, yeah, like, I get it. So yeah,
that's true. I actually had a thing. I was walking along a trail just recently, and I was wearing my Motorhead England shirt, and usually I'm just like not paying attention to other people. I'm looking at all the beautiful nature, and a guy was walking the other way, and he looked, and he did kind of like a double take, and then he's like, "Oh, cool shirt, man." And I looked up and I noticed he had a Motorhead hat on, and I was like, "Oh yeah, man, cool hat." And he's like, he said something like, "We're Motorhead brothers."
Right. Right.
Like, okay. I kept going.
Understand. Yeah, right.
But for a moment, there was that, we're all in this together,
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. Whatever you're being drawn to emotionally about it, well, maybe people wouldn't do that so much with a pop t-shirt, maybe not as much, not in the same way.
I think punk people did a lot of that.
Punk did, but you had to wear the right shirt.
Yeah, otherwise you were a poser. I mean, that was an issue with the thrash stuff too, right? That was a word used a lot in the thrash community for anybody who wasn't doing thrash.
Right. Yes.
So Andrew says a follow on. If early doom acts received limited critical coverage compared with contemporaneous punk and new wave of British heavy metal groups, and if the working class foundation is true for doom, to what extent did class bias within music journalism of the period contribute to that marginalization? I mean, I don't think that. I mean, other than like a few of the music magazines deliberately devoted to it, I don't think they liked new wave of British heavy metal all that much. Kerrang certainly did, right? I mean, Circus and Hit Parader didn't really use those terms much.
I don't know.
Yeah. And a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal bands, they were also pretty working class. I mean, actually, Raven would go to junkyards and find old stereo speakers to make their own amps out of them, but we associate them with speed metal rather than doom, rightly so. Right. I don't know. I mean, did punk is weird, right? Because you get all these bands that were essentially like, astroturfing, they weren't really punk, like the Sex Pistols, you know. And then you got a lot of like bands that were genuinely punk and probably, you know, blue collar, you know, backgrounds and didn't get good. Certainly didn't get on MTV or get the music critics, you know, giving them a nice nod or anything.
The interest with that is it was a very obvious subculture. The doom metal was more subculture, and if you knew, you knew. But the punk scene,
that's a good point, actually. You know, so like when thrash came on the scene, there was almost like a deliberate downscaling away from the, like, you know, studded wristbands and stuff like that that was associated with like traditional heavy metal. And they certainly weren't doing the glammy, let's dress up, be fashion plates. It was blue jeans, t-shirt, maybe a denim or a leather jacket, and you probably took that off when you played, you know. And it was usually a band shirt that they were doing. It would be, I don't know enough about like what these guys were wearing when they were out there on stage or out on the town, but I imagine it was not a lot. It wasn't a lot of like, let's say it's not fashion oriented. It wouldn't make sense for it to be, right? Ken says, I think it did in the UK, and by extension, the music press were pretty conservative in the late 70s and early 80s. New wave of British heavy metal was a counterculture against that prevailing conservatism. Yeah, and I kind of think doom metal, like I was saying earlier, could be viewed as a counterculture within heavy metal too. You know, they weren't getting all the great press and attention. They weren't getting record deals for the most part. You know, they kind of had to forge their own way.
Yeah, you know, it also makes me think the like Led Zeppelin. I've never called doom metal, but is Dazed and Confused.
Okay.
You know, it was kind of around the same time because that was on the first album, Dazed and Confused. So that was 69, 70.
Yeah.
But I mean, that I don't know if that was a hit. I mean, that's one of those people know that song, but
might have been a slow burner.
Yeah, you know, because it's like if we're talking about press, well, I guess, like I said, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter anyways because they weren't a doom metal band.
Yeah, I mean, I think most music critics in general in the 70s didn't like heavy metal bands and used heavy metal as a derogatory term.
Right.
You know, I mean, Black Sabbath got terrible press. You know? So,
well, you know, it's like what Iron Maiden always says: the critics never liked them. They never had airplay, but they sell. You know, and it's if you know, you know. I think it's one of those things. They didn't need product placement. They didn't need. They just had the people that really, you know, joined together as, you know, metalheads. You know, and then they're just, you know, they are great. They're actually absolutely amazing. But yeah, the press thing is, you know, is pretty interesting. I don't remember. I remember guitar magazines having the metal guitarists in it with interviews and stuff. They would, I guess, maybe in the musician magazines would cover it more than say Hit Parader or.
Yeah, you know, I mean, obviously we all knew about Black Sabbath.
Yes.
I would say with most of these bands, and I'm actually a huge fan of doom metal. You know, when people are like, "What genre are you into? You like death? Nah, not really. You like black metal? Nah. I mean, early black metal, like Venom, sure, but I'm not really into what they call black metal these days. But I'll say, yeah, I really do like doom, and I like stuff that continues on in the present. As a matter of fact, one band that I wish hadn't broken up, that who I just love, is Orchid. You know, and they're very, very late, you know, like the 20 teens. But you know, I mean, I knew about Blue Cheer, but we're not saying that they were a doom metal band. Maybe they just gave some oomph to it. I'd never heard of Pentagram or and you know, they were just down south from us. Trouble, Pagan Alter, Witchfinder General. I never heard of them until much, much later. I did hear about St. Vitus. People recommended them to me. I remember in high school, they were like, "Oh, you like this kind of stuff? You're going to love St. Vitus." And then nobody had any tapes of them.
Mm.
They were really hard to find. And I did hear about, who was it? There was somebody else that I remember hearing about who we ran across in this, but it just wasn't on our radars, at least in the Midwest, you know.
No, I mean, I was in the Midwest up until I was about 10 or 11, but I was in a suburb of Boston. I was still in the sticks,
Yeah.
so to speak. But I wasn't I wasn't the Boston proper or anything. I was in a suburb south of it.
I'm sure there probably were some doomy bands in Boston playing at some kind of low tier that we haven't come across, right? And they never recorded anything. But I haven't seen anything like that. It seems like there's like areas where you see stuff popping up. Like, turns out weirdly, places like Maryland wind up being kind of important. Or, we mentioned Chicago. Sweden obviously winds up being quite important for that. I think in part because of the influence of Candlemas. I mean, there was Mercy, which was another doom metal band that after playing some early stuff that wasn't doom, they kind of shifted to that. It looks like Italy was kind of an important place as well. In the 1980s, you've got Black Hole and Run After Two, which is an epic doom band. But none of this stuff was like getting out there really. And we know about it now because we have the internet. If we didn't have access to this stuff, we couldn't hear 99% of this music, and we wouldn't know the backstories of most of these bands either.
That's a good, yeah. Like a lot of this is news to me. A lot of these bands.
Yeah.
It would, like, if you were to ask, especially in the time, even in the 80s, I wasn't aware. I mean, they weren't on the radio. Interesting. I wonder. I wonder if we looked if they had opening slots with non-doom bands and how they did, or some of these bands that didn't quite make the headline.
Typically, if they did, it would be with something that's more traditional heavy metal,
Right.
or with like a death metal band or something like that, something else that's considered extreme. I mean, they're not going to be opening for Rat,
Right, exactly.
or Ozzy or something like that,
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there are a few others that I do want to quickly highlight. We won't go through all the different, interesting bands, but one that was in Japan is called Belzeb, and they were formed in 1985. And they were like the weirdo outlier thing. They won some contests, and then they opened for this thrash band Black Rose, which already had some like following at the time, and they got onto this recording that was entitled Satanic Metal. So they're playing off of that stuff, and they weren't able to actually like put out a debut album until 1989. And that's kind of like par for the course, right? You try to do whatever you can. You're really going up the stream. It kind of goes to Andrew says, so does Doom's marginalization reflect genre prejudice more than class prejudice? I wouldn't even call it genre prejudice. It was like, you guys are playing weird shit that we don't really want to hear. So we're not going to like, give you a record deal or play your music or invite you to our club. It's not like, oh, you play doom music and we don't like that. It's just, you're not doing the kinds of stuff that we can recognize as what counts as heavy metal, or you're doing stuff that's just too slow, too old school, I think that's part of what was going on.
I think a few, well, we'll get to them, but there's a few bands that you talk about later on that somehow did emerge.
Yeah. Well, we've mentioned some of them already. They talk about the big four of Pentagram, which now is huge on the scene. People are talking about Trouble, St. Vitus, and Candlemas. I think a lot of people know about Pagan Alter these days. I don't know that many people know about Witchfinder General, and it's probably because they only put out those 2 albums, and it's kind of a shame. Both that not as many people know about them because they're really good albums, but it's also a shame they didn't put out any more albums. And it's hard to get traction if you only have a small catalog today, I think. People want, and this is a big generalization, I could be totally wrong, but I think people want to be able to like consume a lot of musical content when they get into a band. They don't just want to listen to 1 or 2 albums over and over again.
That's always interesting, the thing when they keep asking, are you going to do another album? And that depends on the band, and that depends on the fan base, because sometimes that's total BS. They don't want the new album. They want the old stuff, right? When are you going to do a new album?
They want a new album that sounds like the old albums, right?
Yeah, and then they don't want to hear it at the concerts. But I think, if it's a band, I'm always curious when, say, Iron Maiden comes out with a new album. I'm always, I don't mind if they do new stuff. Or and I don't, not that I don't mind. It's not that
we're not the gatekeepers of what Iron Maiden puts out.
Right? Yeah, I mean, yeah,
they don't call us up and say we're thinking about another 12 tracks. What's your take on that?
Yeah, but I mean, bands do put out albums and then don't play anything from the new album on the tour. Styx is one of them. They're on tour right now, and I actually looked up the set list. They have a new album that just came out. I think there might be 1 song in the set.
Oh,
and why do it? And the fans don't want it. The fans want the same old set list. So that's kind of my point. Is why are you putting out a new album unless you're under contract? I don't know their situation, but that's the one band I thought of because they were just in town last night, and I'm thinking, it'll be right to play 5 songs from the new album, but apparently they think that wouldn't go well.
Yeah.
But
so Ken says definitely agree about Witchfinder General. Death Penalty is a genre classic. They deserve to be hugely popular given their evident but underdeveloped talent. Yeah, I mean, and they were one of these bands where, I mean, I actually thought about maybe we should do an episode on like how things went badly for bands. We did something kind of like this with our what if hypothetical.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Was more like, well, what if this guy didn't leave the band or this guy had joined the band? But you look at like some of the things where they just didn't know what they didn't know, and how could they possibly have done better given the circumstances that they were in? Stars would have had to align in different ways. Managers would have not have had to rip them off. There's all sorts of matters like that. I think it would actually make a great theme for an episode sometime. Let's take, for example, the band Riot. Really, really great American new wave of British heavy metal sounding band, 3 really great albums before Guy Speranza leaves as a vocalist. And then they kind of go downhill, but they were screwed by the fact that Quiet Riot made it big. And so everyone would see the word riot and they'd be like, you must mean Quiet Riot, right? And they couldn't get any more traction after that, we saw something recently with Winger on it. Andy and I were watching this documentary about the LA scene, and the guys from Winger were like, yeah, that Beavis and Butthead having the kid wearing the shirt, that killed us. Yeah, we could, we overnight, the places that we booked, nobody would come anymore because it wasn't considered cool anymore to go see a Winger show. And it's not like they weren't any good, they were quite good, but
they're amazing. Yeah. I mean, they're still touring, but yeah, that killed them at the time. And, you have like, that's a super group, you have the drummer from the Dixie Dregs in there. Reb Beach is no joke. The writing's incredible, and Kip can sing, and he's a good looking guy. I mean, they had it all. But yeah, he had mentioned that. I've seen him mention that. Just
factors just like totally outside of your control. And I guess that could fit in with the theme of doom. The world is hostile. Maybe you get a couple good years and that's it. So
yeah.
So Andrew has an interesting question here that I think is a good place for us to start wrapping up. What do we think about the future of Doom? With streaming algorithms rewarding brevity and polish, should Doom evolve with the times? And I would say Doom hasn't evolved with the times, except in like using better technology and stuff like that. But it's like broken off into all these subgenres, right? So what the bands that we're talking about here are all considered, with the exception of Candlemas, which is considered epic doom, they're all considered what they now call traditional doom, So should they get with the times and shorten their songs? And I don't know, the ones that are still out there performing, do things differently? I actually think, and I'd be really curious to hear your take on this, both from the technology and the musical side, Scott, that the bands that are really doing a good job. So one we didn't talk about yet is Electric Wizard, and they formed in 1989, didn't put out an album until 1994, but they're a huge doom band. And I guess some things are kind of updated about their song, their sound. It's not the same as Black Sabbath, but Orchid, one of the best descriptions of them is their catalog includes the songs that Black Sabbath never got around to recording. So when you hear an Orchid song, even though the singer doesn't sound exactly like Ozzy, and the bassist is not Geezer Butler, and it's not Bill Ward and Tony Iommi on drums and guitar, you're like, yeah, this could have been a Sabbath song, and a Sabbath early period song, but they're playing it through newer amps and with newer equipment, and it sounds just awesome,
Yeah.
Plus they're not doing as they're not doing drugs as erratically as Black Sabbath was, derailing themselves. I think they're pretty clear that they and Electric Wizard do a lot of drugs, but maybe they know how to manage it better.
Yeah, right. It's funny. It's a topic I speak about a lot. Is come on, man, change with the times. I'm not. I think everybody on here knows my music's not on streaming because it's a bad deal. If you just complain about it, and you have to think, well, what's your demographic? It's not going to be if you change your stuff to be more, if you change your stuff to be more palatable and happier or more polished and shorter songs. I mean, you're giving up what makes you, and then you'll gain a following that, well, quite frankly, isn't what you want. You're targeting people you don't want for numbers, and numbers don't pay. And so I think, if we think about music history, and when Spotify started in 2018, there was streaming, but Spotify is the main offender. But how did anybody hear music in the 70s? How did anybody hear the music in the 1700s? Bach and all that. There's a community, and there still is. Maybe certain people don't go out, and they've lost they're missing the intrinsic value of the musical experience, but not everybody's doing that. And, I've been told, like, for my instrumental project, get a singer or make the songs more like this or do this. Why? So I can attract what? If I attract anything at all, it's like, so the change with the times, it's not really the times. It is something that exists. But I think I've said this on here, that we have 350 million people in the United States, and only 80 million of those subscribe to streaming. That's not even half. So what you know, in TikTok, it's about the same number. It's about 80, but 60% of those are people under 24 years old. So this whole, and I hear it all the time because it's like, well, you got to be on there, man, to make it. I don't know anybody that's on there that's not complaining that they're getting ripped off. I mean, it's not, you know, you could play train stations and get discovered like Tracy Chapman. So I really think that's, you know, Andrew, that's a great point, because I would say keep doing what you're doing, and to go viral is not a dream of mine, and you don't want the short attention span, that part of society that won't work with Doom, I don't think. So I have a pretty strong stance on that, as a lot of people know, but it goes against the grain with a lot of people believe. So maybe it's just a different perspective.
I think one of the things that you were bringing up there, so when bands in the past have tried to become more in tune with the times and do something that is going to fit better. Great example of this is Raven, really great albums early on. And then there's kind of a misstep with, well, we got to be a bit more attuned to the poppy metal, and their fans are like, what the hell is this crap? I think it was The Pack is Back. And I think there's a good song off of that, right? On and On is off of that, which they still play in concert. But for the most part, their fan base, got kind of fed up with that. They came back because they shifted afterwards. And there's a lot of things like that. The people that you're going to get by picking up something that seems to be more popular, they're not going to stay with you. They're not going to become lifelong fans that will buy the merch and buy the next album and maybe see you on tour. So you don't gain anything by doing that. And we see people giving this kind of advice in all sorts of venues. Like, I remember years and years and years ago when MOOCs were really big, and I was on YouTube, and I would have people who are like, hey man, you should make a MOOC. And I'd be like, well, to begin with, that's not something that I can do. That's something like these really big universities are doing, because they have the structure for doing all that kind of stuff. But even if I did, these things are crap. 99% of the people who sign up for them don't complete the classes. They're just sort of like, a vanity project in many ways. But people were talking about it was the buzz thing. It'd be sort of like saying, oh, auto-tune is really cool.
Right.
We should all use auto-tune. Well,
right.
I don't know about that. And with doom metal, where you've got something that has a very rich ethos to it, it might be more damaging than if you just were a pop star and you're like, yeah, okay, this is what we do this decade, this is what we did that decade. Maybe there's less flexibility for doing that, Oh, Ken has a great question for you, Scott. What's the best way to support the bands we love? Do concerts and merch offer better income for artists?
Yeah, the way bands get by is show up to the show. Just show up to the shows, and merch. Although a lot of the venues have their hands in the merch, I mean, we're pretty much screwed right now. It's like there's a lot of pay to play, but yeah, I mean, I also have this weird relationship with the word support, because back in, say, the 80s, did we ever say we're supporting this band, or were we loved it and we couldn't get enough of it? Oh my God, they're on the front cover, I'm buying that. Oh my God, they're coming to town, I'm going to wait in line for 5 hours. We weren't necessarily using the word support. Now it's like some kind of, it
wasn't a deliberate thing, right?
Now it's like, and people say it's like they'll show up to shows and it's more like you owe them a favor because, well, they did something to support you. And being in the business for 30 years, that seems foreign to me. And yeah, it's a good thing to say, like, okay, well, I want these bands to keep playing, And the best thing is to show up to the shows. I think that's major. It's weird. I play for some artists. They'll show up with no merch and they'll say, please just, follow my Spotify. Please just click like on my Spotify. And that's ridiculous. That's like begging for a like or a click that's not going to do anything. You got people there at least have, I don't know why people don't. You could put your stuff on streaming, but like then have the bonus tracks that aren't on streaming on your website for download. Or, or a full live show of the stuff that's not available on, bands have to be smarter. Musicians have to be smarter. I mean, musicians did it. They're giving their stuff away for free and they complain about it, but they think that's the path to success. And I know very few people that have done anything with that. So I think, Ken, showing up to their show, if you like the merch, I'm picky about t-shirts. It's got to be a cool t-shirt. So I won't just buy, but the vinyl, because I got a good turntable and everything. If I really like the music, I'll buy the vinyl, no problem. Unless they're getting, unless they want $40 for it or something, unless they're like, pricing themselves out. Like in New York City, a lot of the people are charging $25 for a CD. And I just want to say, man, you're giving your music away for free. Why would I pay $25 for a CD? If it was more $10 or $15, okay. But if there's a little bit like, well, I need to make up the money, well, you're giving it away. So I think showing up to the shows is number one. If there's people in the room to see you, that feels amazing.
That's true. That's quite important. And I bet you and I can both relate to this in different ways. If I go to give a talk somewhere and it's a public venue and 3 people show up in a room that seats 200, now, I figured out ways to deal with that. I'm like, well, at least 3 people showed up. I'll do the talk just like I would with, 300 people being here. But you do really have to struggle to maintain that energy and to not feel a bit dismayed about it. And I imagine it's the same way for musicians going to a venue and, hardly anyone shows up,
Yeah. And I've played to empty rooms too, for artists. And it can be heartbreaking because I could be playing guitar for somebody that I think is really outstanding, But, even the ones that are bringing people in, it's just kind of like friends and family, or it's, hey, you owe me. I came to your show. It's a different feeling now than before. If you were good before the internet, people showed up. You didn't need the internet,
right?
And people, I used to play every Monday in my 20s. Well, not the whole, for a few years, on Monday, an off night at a club with my trio, and it was obscure songs I was writing, and it was packed every Monday. No internet. It was just, if you were good, people would show up. Now the culture, there's not, well, at least here in the States, I don't know how it is other places, but the attention span, the want to go see music or see art, or now the internet is where people are. Yeah, Mark, you're right. Although they're not getting the intrinsic value of the performance, that's a big. I remember that the live stream doing.
Oh, this is interesting. Yeah. This is Andrew showing up to shows. Does anyone remember that live stream Doom gig surge during COVID lockdowns? Now without shared air, sub bass, you can feel or incense to smell to the live ritual collapse. I would describe the Sun O gig I went to, or have audiences reinvented it via headphones and chat feed internet communion. I mean, I do think that there is something to going to a place where you smell the stale beer and there is a stage show and stuff like that. Even if they're just they're playing, you look at the set list and they're playing exactly the same thing there as they played the night before, and they're not even sure which city they're in. They're like, hello, and then they have to look at their note cards. Hello, Milwaukee. There's still something about going to a live performance that.
Well, not only that, I talk about this a lot. especially, you know, bands that don't use any backing tracks, no, you know, bands that go out there, it's even if they're playing the same set list, there's something different about, you know, like I'll go, if there's a song I really like, I'll go find the tour it was on YouTube and find 12 different versions of it. They're all different. I mean, they're all pretty much the same, but the rooms sound different. Their gear sounds different, maybe overseas because the electricity is different. There's something about the moment and being part of a moment that you can't replace it on YouTube. I mean, YouTube is okay, but going there and being like you're part of the energy of that, and that's part of the art of it.
Yeah.
And if people don't care about it, they essentially don't care about the art of it, or they're not experiencing it, and they don't know they're not experiencing it. So you know, it's like, you know, with all these fake guitar amps and everything, it's like, I can understand if you're doing, you know, music theater, that's a good idea. But a rock show where there's no sound on the stage, the band's going to play super inside and super, you know, and they'll, like, they're in a studio and they're not responding to the sound of the room, the audience so much.
Yeah.
I could go on forever. It could be an episode on its own. But I really think that we have vivid memories of being at a show, the time where so-and-so, you know, did this, or the time that, you know, somebody did this cool, like, or the vocalist did the melody a little different. I remember at a Rush show during Limelight, Geddy Lee sang one of the phrases a little different. And I remember getting chills going, oh my God, that was great, you know, but probably didn't happen often.
Yeah.
I could rant about that. It can't be a replicated authentic atmosphere at a metal show. Well, that's true. You know, the energy of the crowd alone is, you know, like when the lights go off and, you know, the band's coming out. I mean, being part of that by itself is pretty intense.
Yeah. And, you know, you can put your headphones on, and you can have really good headphones, but you can't get from them the bass that actually, like, shakes your bones and you feel in your chest, along with, like, the super heavy guitar and stuff like that. I mean, you can have it in your ears, but you're not having it in your body.
I'll give a quick example. I saw Sammy Hagar, was it last summer? And opening for Sammy Hagar was Loverboy. And Loverboy, if you don't have the guitar sound, the songs are fine, but he was clear. The guitarist was clearly using a digital something.
Oh.
Like, you know, he was for convenience. And I was like, yeah, no, I mean, I'm missing the Marshalls. When Satriani came out with all his tube amps and everything, it was like the sound of the cabs and everything. It was he'd hit a G chord and I just feel it. And I use that as an example to people, as, you know, you do know the difference, even if you can't explain it. You know, it was like, you could tell who I mean, I'm not putting Loverboy down, but like the big rock legend is that they're out there doing the rock thing. And I don't know, we should get into sometime, if it's contempt to the crowd, you get what we give you because it's convenient.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of ideas we've had for show episodes come up in this that maybe we'll do during the next year or so. But we should wrap up. So, but we'll take. So this is an interesting observation by Andrew, and then we'll wrap up. Then you have the audience and its terrible habit of phone recording the show. Definitely something new. For example, my friend saw the whole Gogol Bordello show through her phone. Does that take away from the experience?
Yes.
As she was there, you know. What do you think about that when you play live, Scott? Or does it happen less in the U.S.? I mean, what a phone if it can record an entire show. What a great battery. But I mean, that's not a great thing.
Or memory.
Yeah.
You know, I do have people pull their phones out, and usually just about all the time, if I'm doing a solo in any genre, it's improvised. And you know, somebody might be recording on their phone and they're looking through their phone, and I'll kind of like open my eyes or look out and there's like 8 phones. And I'm thinking, well, I want to be part of this with these people. You know, they're focusing so much on looking through the phone and thinking, I'm going to watch this later, but they do, I agree, they do miss the experience. I'm kind of like, I want to see them focused on the band and what's happening on stage and see what the reaction is. And it's something you're there that you can't really share with someone else. But it does happen a lot. Like concerts, it's insane.
Yeah.
Concerts, there's just phones everywhere. And I'm thinking, why did you buy a ticket? I mean, if you get a little bit of something, okay. Or you get some pictures, that's cool. But the ones that sit like you're saying on the phone, like for every song, why are you there? Why didn't you just wait till somebody put it up on YouTube?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say two things that, because I've recorded stuff at concerts, sometimes so like I can show it to somebody else. So on the one hand, you record something and then afterwards you're like, Jesus, I can't even tell what the hell song this is, because they were so loud or something like that, or it's very pixelated and you're like, why the hell did I waste my time with that crap? But the other thing that happens, because we're never in the front row, so when you're recording with your phone, part of what you're recording is all these other jackasses in front of you who have their phones up and are recording it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the shows that they make you put your phone in the bag and lock it.
Andy went to one of those recently, yeah.
And people complain, it's my right. And I'm thinking, I don't mind it because Pat Metheny's one of them. Certainly comedians have to do that.
Oh, yeah. That's smart, yeah.
But I don't mind when they say no phones. Sometimes if I'm at a show, I will get a small bit of a tune for someone or pictures, but to sit there most of the time it's disappointing, but I do like the ones, of course there's always people that sneak their phones in because you're not getting frisk search. And those people kind of anger me because they're like, they're taking selfies and we snuck it in and we don't have to do the rules like everyone else. And then they sit on their phone and, this respect of the artist that asks you not to do that. I'm not big enough to make any demands like that, but it does kind of bother me when I look up and there's like 10 phones there. I mean, in one part you feel flattered that somebody wants to capture what you're doing, but at the same time it's like, this is an experience we're supposed to be having.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to wrap up. So thanks everybody for joining in. Great questions and comments, and
as always.
Yeah, and thanks, Scott, for giving us a little demo as well. It's always useful to have that sort of thing, I think.
That was fun. I just kind of thought of it. I didn't know if it transferred over there, but it sounds like some of you heard the difference. It's more ready here, like you can hear it, but it's definitely I'm glad I thought of kind of doing a B in the sounds. So
yeah. All right. Anything else that you want to say, Scott, to end it?
No, I really like this. I'm a big Black Sabbath fan, so I don't mind talking about them for a long time. Some interesting stuff always comes up here, and I learned something from everyone that joins. Everybody's so knowledgeable and bright and everything. So I love the discussion.
Yeah, it's kind of like jamming together, right? There's no way you can actually predict ahead of time what a jam session is going to be like. You can have some general ideas, and actually with this crew, we can be like, yeah, nobody's going to like say stuff that's like totally, just a string of swear words or totally off base or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, some of the directions that we end up going in, I think are prompted by everyone participating. So